What's a family secret you didn't get told until you were older that made things finally make sense? Ever felt like something in your family didn't quite add up, but no one would ever talk about it? These people grew up with whispers, weird rules, and unexplained silences, until one secret changed everything, from hidden addictions and affairs to heartbreaking betrayals and chilling crimes. These are the family secrets that only came out years later, and once they did, everything finally made sense. Some will leave you stunned, others will break your heart. These are the stories they were never supposed to hear, but now you will. Story 1: that my grandmother's husband was a pedophile. All of a sudden, I knew why my uncle was so weird and would pick me up and carry me away rather than let me stay alone in a room with him. For the longest time I thought my uncle was a real prude. My male cousins could all swim naked or run around in just their swim trunks, but my uncle made me always wear a swimsuit and put on a cover-up when I came out of the pool. He later admitted if God forbid he touched you, I was making sure no one could try to blame you. They blamed all his other victims for being too tempting. My uncle, bless his heart, wanted to kill that man so bad. For that matter, so did my dad. Finding out the pedo was, well, a pedo, made all of their muttering to each other at family gatherings make so much more sense. Story 2: my dad never called his stepmom anything but her real name, Margaret. He has 7 brothers and sisters, and they all called her mom or some form of that. When I got older, it turns out my grandpa was actually cheating on my real grandma/my dad's mom with Margaret while she was dying for colon cancer. My dad was 5 when she dies, and as she was dying, my dad had to call my grandpa to tell him to come home because she was dying. After that, Margaret and her 3 kids moved in, and my dad was forced to live with his sister, who was 18, and married. This was late 70s backcountry, so not abnormal for the time from then until he turned 16, when he decided to move in with his best friend and his mom. So I learned that he probably has always had resentment towards Margaret because of everything that happened when he was so young, and never wanted to call her anything that resembled a mother because that's not what she was to him. Story 3: not all that extreme, but it was emotional for me. My grandfather was the typical tough, rugged mountain man. He never expressed emotion, and in fact rarely ever even spoke at family gatherings. He would just sit in the corner drinking beer. I never felt that he and I had a very good relationship, considering I was the weird, artsy kid in the family. We didn't have much to talk about because we couldn't relate to each other well. He died of lung cancer 2 years ago. A couple of months after he died, I was visiting my parents, and my mom pulled out a shoebox that belonged to him filled with sentimental photographs that he kept hidden in his closet. Nobody knew about it until after he died, and they were cleaning his things out. Almost every single photograph was of me. It broke my heart. I wish I would have been closer to him. He clearly loved me a lot more than I thought he did. Story 4: my late father was a great dad, went to work, came home every night, and nothing was really out of the ordinary except that he would ask my sisters and I to let him use the money from our piggy banks. My grand had lived with us, and he had a great pension and relatively no bills, so he spoiled us rotten and would always give us money because he knew we had it, but told us not to tell anyone and that he'd give it back. He would also really only have 2 moods, really cranky or extremely sweet. My sisters and I called it his nice face. This was all we knew until I was about in 8th grade. We went to a private school, and my dad would tell us school was cancelled, there was a gas leak, institute days, etc., and we would stay home. When we would go back to school, nobody else would know what we meant, as they had been in school. One day, just before my graduation, my mom let out a scream and started screaming. Our house was being foreclosed on, and my dad hadn't been paying the mortgage and had been trying to cover up for the fact that he had been a functional cocaine addict. The nice face was when he was high. The school absences were because he'd spent tuition money on drugs and then had to pay before my mom caught wind. Apparently it had gotten worse by this time, but he'd been an addict for more than 20 years, and none of us knew story 5. Dad and his brother hate each other. His dad, my grandfather, was dying. He needed a kidney. Dad was a Mac and didn't donate. Once he passed, shit kicked off for real. I always thought it was due to my dad not giving the kidney. My dad drinks a lot. It would affect him greatly to give up a kidney. There were many accusations about his drinking and being selfish. After the funeral, we were asked come take a lot of his belongings, and his brother showed up and made a big scene. I broke it up and went to talk to my uncle. I was like WTF and didn't make progress. Keep in mind that I'm like 30 plus in the middle of this. Last year it all became 100% clear. My uncle likes to play the victim, but was a piece of shit trying to cover his ass. My uncle has been married 6 times. He lied to his wife about how many marriages he had. He is a serial cheater. During the numerous hospital stays of my grandfather, my uncle would travel to be with his dad. But in reality, he was out fucking everything that moved, namely a nurse looking after my grandfather. At this time, he is married to wife 6. She thinks she is 3rd and has his first child, who is about 10. Uncle had always been this guy, but it blew up when my dad was hanging out with his bro and his brother's business partner. Dad got drunk and laid all his brother's dirty laundry out to the business partner, all of it, every detail. The business partner jokingly made comments about it in proximity of the current wife. This obviously caused tension that eventually had the partners separate. Uncle went nuclear on Dad about it. Dad told him, 1, if he was that upset about it, why does he keep doing it, and 2, back the fuck off unless he wants him to lay all his shit out to the current wife. So all this time, all this hate due to Uncle trying to keep his secret and masking it as my dad being a piece of shit alcoholic or wanting to stop drinking and save his dad's life. Story 6. My mom was in the hospital, so I flew home. Me and my dad were hanging out getting drunk, and he started telling me family secrets, almost like he was trying to get a reaction out of me. An uncle was molested. An estranged aunt might actually have a different father than we thought, etc. The one that really got me was when he revealed that he used to do coke. I was imagining he meant like in his 20s. I said, when did you stop? And he said, I think you were about 19. Like fucking what, man? My entire childhood. And he said, yup. Did mom know? Yes. How much? About a gram a week. At first it was completely insane to me, but looking back it made a ton of stuff make way more sense. Crazy mood swings, explosive fights. 1 minute he would be fine, and then suddenly he would be raving about something. I knew he drank, so I always blamed the instability in the house on that. But finding out he was regularly doing coke all my life was both astounding, and it made complete sense. Story 7 from my father's family line. My great-grandfather killed my great-grandmother with an axe while she was sleeping. My grandma, who was the oldest one, raised all of her siblings. She was 19 at the time and just married my granddad, who was 19 too. Youngest sister was just 2 years old. They were 9 in total. I knew my grandma raised all her siblings, but I always thought it was because her mother died from some illness. I just found out when I was 17 and asked my aunt. Edit, wow, this really blew up. Thanks for the upvotes and the kind words. Grandma is a real hero indeed. She always tells stories of how she managed to feed so many people. They were really poor back in those ages. First of all, mandatory. English is not my first language. Sorry for any grammar mistake. It's crazy and sad at the same time how many people have similar stories. I'll try to answer some questions, but why did he kill her? Did he go to prison? He was an alcoholic, came home drunk one night, and had the idea that she was cheating on him. She wasn't. Actually, he was the one who was having an affair, and even had a kid with another woman. I never met them. He went to prison, got cancer, and died. Nobody wanted to claim the corpse and give him a funeral. Sorry if this is intrusive or offensive in any way, but schizophrenia or some related mental illness wasn't the reason for the murder, was it? I suspect he had some mental illness, but he was never diagnosed. This was in the 50s, and we are from Uruguay. Mental illness was taboo back in those days. So did your grandparents end up having biological children as well? Yes, my father was born 10 years after that, and my aunt, the one who told me the story, was born 25 years after that. Story 8. My aunt and uncle, who passed away when I was 11, were drug addicts. I adored them, but as I got older, I started seeing less and less of them and never understood why. My parents briefly told me when I was 16 and that my uncle didn't die of a brain tumor, actually had one though, but instead he shot himself while my aunt was in the other room, which led to my aunt's drug-related death on New Year's Day. They finally told me the whole story when I was 21. I was the last person to know. Even my little brother knew before me because I was extremely close to them and looked so highly of them. I still do. I wish I would have known sooner, but I understand why they didn't tell me. Story 9. My grandmother was a hard drug addict. She was a nurse and basically nurse Jackied her way into stealing dilated hydromorphone from the hospital and shooting it up for a decade or so. I still don't know the real specifics, but this was happening when I was roughly 1 to 10 years old, and I was told about it when I was in my mid-20s. She was never noticeably out of it, but I remember her being super chill every time she watched us and rarely ever drove us anywhere. Now I understand that she was just stoned sideways and wasn't going to risk driving us kids around while she was under the influence. Another odd thing, when she was stoned, she would always eat ice chips. She's sober now and doesn't anymore, but I remember her chomping on ice cubes all day long when we were little. Edit. I just spoke to my mother to make sure my facts were straight. A few things to add. I was younger than 10 when this all went down. Changed my age above to 1-10 years old. She was not shooting narcotics for years. She was abusing pain pills Demerol for years. 1-6 months after she switched to injecting Dilaudid/Demerol, she was noticed at the hospital and drug tested on spot. Her license was revoked, but she went through the rehabilitation programs and got her license back and continued working as a nurse until she retired. Mom said that she had always chomped ice because she is anemic and because of pica, though plenty of people have suggested that opiates and ice chomping run hand in hand. Mom tells me that Grandma isn't the same woman she once was. She used to have a confidence about her like aura that followed her into every room. She demanded respect and fought hard for the things she believed in. Her strong will is no longer a part of her, almost as if the shame and ridicule of her character has snuffed out the flame she once had. I always have and always will love her unconditionally. She is our matriarch. Story 10. My father always talked about how his brother lied to a doctor so he could get on disability. I thought it was so easy for anyone to get a disability check. All you had to do was tell your doctor you were abducted by aliens. Years later, my father had a mental breakdown. He started telling stories about the government implanting a chip in his brain. He went out and got a CAT scan as proof, and he would point to things that weren't there. My dad was diagnosed as a schizophrenic, and years later, he started collecting a disability check because he couldn't hold a job, kind of hard to perform any job when every conversation, including interviews, veers into the government trying to fuck me in the ass. As an adult, it dawned on me when my aunt mentioned mental illness runs in the family. My uncle had never lied to his doctor. He told that doctor what he believed to be the absolute truth. He had been abducted by aliens. Story 11. I have an uncle who is a hardcore alcoholic and lived with my grandparents until they passed. We always thought he was just a non-motivated loser. I have another uncle that passed away well before I was born, got hit by a car coming back from the store getting something for my grandparents. After both grandparents passed, my mom told me that the alcoholic uncle was asked to go to the store but bribed his little brother to go instead, which led to his death. My grandmother, who I have always held in very, very high regard, told my alcoholic uncle afterward that his brother would still be alive if he had gone to the store like she asked. I cannot imagine the guilt that would have laid on him and completely understand why he ended up that way as a result. In my adult life, I've found that my uncle is actually a pretty good man, just dealt a shitty hand. Story 12, that my granny attempted suicide when my mom was in high school. My mom was the one that found her. Luckily, she did find her, because if she hadn't, she wouldn't have survived. It explains why my mom panics the way she does and jumps to conclusions all the time. If she can't get a hold of me or my brother on the phone, she automatically assumes we are dead and she panics. Recently, she couldn't get a hold of my brother for a few hours and she lost all composure and had a nervous breakdown. We just are starting to realize after all these years that she probably has undiagnosed PTSD. Story 13. Okay, so when I was a little kid, my uncle had something going on. As a small child, the details were frequently lost to me, so after a while I just kind of accepted it. Now he is also a notorious jokester, so I never knew when he was being serious. One time I was sitting with my uncle and he was talking about a recent doctor's visit. He told me, entirely straight-faced, that he had eaten some watermelon seeds by mistake, and they had taken root and sprouted in his stomach, so he had to get them removed. To my 8-year-old self, this made complete sense, and I took his advice to be very diligent when consuming my soccer practice watermelon slices, avoiding all of the seeds. And that was basically it. I went on through life just accepting this whole story, never questioned it, until I was around 13, when somehow a realization just clicked into place where, holy shit, my uncle had cancer. Somehow this had slipped past my gullible child mind for years, and there was never a moment where my parents decided to tell me about it. Instead, at some point in my teens, it was just common knowledge. My uncle is now entirely healthy, nothing ever came back, and he continues to troll me and my siblings whenever he gets the chance. Story 14. My grandfather did not die of a heart attack in the garage. My grandmother accidentally hit him with the car. I never knew why my grandmother refused to drive anywhere and preferred walking. Edit to add, what happened was she was in the driveway trying to back out. He was standing in front of the car guiding her. She thought she was in reverse. She was looking back, pressed the gas. Car went forward and pinned my grandfather against the garage door. He died later that day at the hospital. Edit again, for all the people accusing my poor grandmother. I was 6 at the time, and I still remember her sobbing uncontrollably at his wake, almost screaming. She kept calling out to him. She had to be removed from the room. They had been married 52 years. She never drove after that. She would walk miles to the grocery store. She borrowed a shopping cart and would bring that back and forth. She never spoke about how he died, but spoke about him all the time. She would always tell me stories and ask me about my memories of him so that I wouldn't forget them. She would tell people he died of a heart attack, that she had found him in the garage, which is where I got that story from. I think that was a kind of coping mechanism so that she wouldn't have to deal with the truth. She lived another 23 years with that guilt. She was a strong lady. Many years later, I had overheard my dad telling someone that his father had died of a car accident. I interjected and said he died of a heart attack in a car. That's not a car accident. I was then let in on the family secret. Story 15. Last year, I found out my dad isn't actually my biological father. He got my sisters and me those Ancestry DNA kits for Christmas to do for fun as a family, and once we got the results, it showed he wasn't my biological father. The fucked up thing is my mom knew the whole time and never told anyone. For 26 years she kept this a secret and never had any intention of telling the truth. When I confronted her about it, she denied, and then once I showed her the results, she finally confessed she'd had an affair with her college boyfriend while my dad was on a business trip for a couple months. After I found all of this out, things finally started making sense. Her and I have never had a great relationship. I always envied other girls growing up that had great mother/daughter relationships and never understood why that couldn't be me. She was very verbally and sometimes physically abusive towards me growing up, but never towards my sisters. She knew I was the product of her affair, and she was ashamed, so she would take it out on me. I was always told I was 6 weeks premature, but now I know she was lying so she could keep her timeline straight so my dad wouldn't find out about the affair. She had another affair with my soccer coach when I was 10, which led to my parents' divorce later that year, and blamed me for it. All of her wrongdoings she would blame me for, and now it all makes sense. She's a really messed up woman. I'm not on speaking terms with her anymore, nor do I really care to meet my biological father. Maybe someday, but I'm not ready to. My relationship with my dad has never been better, and that's all I really care about. Edit. Holy shit, I did not expect this thread to blow up like this. I added some more text for clarification about a few things. Also, thank you kind strangers for my first silvers and my first gold. Story 16. My mom, aunts, and uncle always called my pap by his first name, not dad or anything. When I was a kid, I thought maybe he just wanted them to call him by his name. Then one day, my mum mentions something about her dad. I think she means my pap. Nope. My mum was the product of an affair, and both men, my Gram's first husband and my mum's biological dad, thought of her as their own and basically co-parented. This was in the early 1960s. Both men raised my mum as their daughter until my Gram's first husband passed away. And before anyone says anything about my Gram, she was married off when she was 16 to an older man to save face for the family. It was not marriage of love but convenience. She fell in love with my grandpa and had permission from her first husband to peruse the relationship. Story 17. I was an only child, and my mother was 40 and father 50 when they had me. They had gotten together rather late in life. My mother always told me that my father didn't want her to get pregnant because he was afraid she was too old and didn't want anything happening to her or the baby. After my father passed away at the age of 95, I took my mother to the Social Security office to take care of paperwork. One of the questions they asked was whether there were any other potential beneficiaries of my father's benefits, such as other children or ex-wives. Being an only child, I immediately answered no. My mother looked at me sheepishly and answered, "That's not exactly correct." It was then, at the age of 45 in the Social Security building, that I learned that my father had previously been married in his 20s and had had a child. Mother and baby died during childbirth. It explained why my parents never had children until late at life, and why he had not wanted to. Story 18. The man I grew up knowing as my grandpa is actually my mom's stepdad. My mom's biological father left to get her a cake on her 2nd birthday and never returned. It wasn't until my grandmother tried to track him down for a divorce after moving in with my grandpa that he decided he wanted to see his children when my mother was 7 years old. Then, when she was 9, he Raped my mother. I always wondered why every year we went to the common Irish last name reunion when my family's name was common German last name. My mother told me when I was 13. We were at the common Irish last name reunion when my friend and I were swept up in the river. We almost drowned. I got out of the water before my friend, and my cousins pulled her out of the water from their boat. A man that I had never actually met, though I saw him every year, had been running along the riverbank and pretty much tackled me when I got out of the water. I remember him stroking my hair, talking about how happy he was that I was safe. He grabbed me by the arm and walked me back to the campsite where the reunion was held. I remember feeling super uneasy because I was alone with him, and everyone always told me not to talk to him. When we got back to the campsite, my mother came running for me, pushed the man, and started yelling at him about how he was never to touch me. When she asked me if I was okay, she asked if he touched me in any way that made me scared or uncomfortable. Then she cried and told me that he was actually her dad and what happened to her. After that, every time he saw me at the reunion and when he was dying, he insisted that I call him Grandpa, and it never stopped giving me the heebie-jeebies. Story 19. My grandma ran away with my grandfather when she was 15 and he was 18. She had her first child a month before she turned 16 and had 3 kids before age 20. They have 5 kids total and were dirt poor for a long time, but have been married for 58 years now and have 2, soon 3 great-grandchildren, and they are young enough to be actively involved in all of our lives, and they do everything with us. I always wondered why my grandma looked so much younger than my friend's grandparents, and I didn't do the math until I was older at it. She didn't run away because she hated her family or because she had already gotten pregnant. She moved away with him because she loved him, and even though he had a lot of flaws, all stemming from growing up homeless, yes, really, they worked through them all. She missed her mom and dad and siblings so much she told me she cried every night for like 3 years because she was so homesick. She had a very loving family, but they did not give her permission to marry my grandfather, so they ran away. I love them both with all my heart, and my grandma is an absolute saint. She's like my best friend. And at first they were dirt poor, and my grandpa worked 2 jobs, but over the years he started his own office janitorial business, and it became successful, and my grandma did classes at community college, night school, online master's program, and eventually got her doctorate in seminary. And over these years they have been wonderful parents/grandparents, and I couldn't ask to have a better family story. 20. My dad witnessed a friend of his shoot himself in the head when he was a teenager. They were having a small get-together at his friend's house, and he went to the other room and came back with his dad's revolver. He then put it to head and squeezed the trigger. My dad and his friends thought it was an elaborate joke until they started seeing the blood pooling around his head. My mom told me about this when I was around 18, and I didn't hear the story directly from my dad until this past Christmas. When I heard about it, though, things started to make sense why my dad didn't want me playing with realistic looking when I was a kid. Like, I remember I was playing with the neighbor's kid one day, and he let me borrow one of his cap guns, and we were pretending to shoot each other on my porch. My dad saw us pointing the guns at each other and flipped out. He grabbed the gun from my hand and smashed it into pieces on the railing and told my friend to go home. I didn't understand and why he got so angry back then, but now I understand it was probably hard for him to see his kid pointing what looked a lot like a real gun at someone. Story 21. My parents separated when I was young, probably around 9 or 10, but the signs were there for years prior. My dad slept on the couch, and when I asked, they both said that the other's snoring kept them awake. They're both horrendous snorers, so this seemed plausible to young me. One day, my mom sits me and my half-brother down to tell us that her and my dad, not my brother's dad, are getting a divorce. I didn't ask why, I just cried. but quickly got over it. They actually didn't get legally divorced until I was around 14, but that's besides the point. Fast forward to the present. I'm a freshman in college, and I'm on the phone with my dad roughly a week ago, and we get on the topic of my mother divorcing my stepdad and her getting a new apartment. He starts just talking about my mom and how apparently she accused him of cheating, and that's what started to drive them apart, and eventually she confessed that she was seeing someone else. My parents got divorced because my mom tried to shift the blame. I'm not allowed to let my mom know that I know this, and I can't really look at her in the same way, but I still love her because she's my mother. At least I wasn't the reason for the divorce, right? Story 22. When I was in elementary school, I was one of two weird kids in the class. The other kid was bullied relentlessly because he was fat. I had few social skills and a deeply religious background, so I didn't know much about pop culture and didn't fit in. Naturally, we became friends. However, the bullied kid decided he wanted to turn the tables and be abusive to someone else for a change, so strange little good girl who was much smaller than him was a good target. I became increasingly uncomfortable being around him, and he liked to scare and hurt me. I told my mom that I didn't want to play with him anymore, but she pushed me to keep calling him to hang out. I gave in for a couple of years until finally I invited him to an event with a bunch of other kids, and he got all dressed up like it was a date. He walked way too close to me the whole time. My mom finally noticed and let me stop seeing him. I found out as an adult that my mom had been in a similar situation with an abusive boy when she was a girl. She had better boundaries and distanced herself from him. He later committed suicide. My mom blames herself. She wanted me to be nice to my abuser in hopes that it would save him from killing himself. I found this out when she saw him around town and gave him my Facebook info. He had fond memories of me. I quickly unfriended him and blocked him when I found out that he'd been stalking some of his exes and had multiple restraining orders against him. I strongly suspect that if I'd kept seeing him after that surprise date, he would have eventually raped me. Society needs to stop valuing boys' feelings over girls' safety. Story 23. I used to think it was weird when my mum would have a panic attack if I didn't pick up the phone or text back soon enough. She would call 10 times, text, Facebook message. If she still couldn't get a hold of me, she would get in her car to come find me. It was only a few years ago that I heard the story for the first time. My grandfather had a heart attack and died in my grandmother's arms in the back of a taxicab in Thailand after being turned away from the hospital. He was a diplomat, and they didn't want the trouble of a foreign dignitary dying in their hospital. He was 45. My mother was 14 and on vacation with her friend from boarding school. After the funeral, my grandmother wound up in a psych ward for 2 years doing electroshock treatment. My uncle tried to kill himself and also wound up in hospital. My aunt up and moved to Scotland. No one ever talked about him. I knew he had a heart attack, but I always thought he died in his sleep. I have only ever seen 2 pictures of him, and yet my grandmother insists that my brother and I are just like him. The strangest part is, if he hadn't died, my mother would never have been in the position to meet my father, and neither my brother or I would exist. This horrible tragedy ruined my family's life and also created space for my life to exist.